Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Shed Organics Show, the podcast with myself, Jordan, chatting to some wonderful, wonderful guests that we have each week, each and every week, offering and sharing some amazing information. And today is another one of those. It's a lovely gentleman by the name of Mykal, who lives down in the Blue Mountains. And you may have already come across Mykal's podcast in the past, which we do touch on in the episode. You'll be able to find the links to his previous podcast episodes and guests down in the description or the show notes. But Mykal lives in the Blue Mountains and is a bit of an expert, even though, it's tough to call ourselves that these days. But Mykal is amazing with a wealth of knowledge on natives here in Australia and also on some indoor houseplants, which we touch on and go into as well. I myself am not too knowledgeable on our native plants here in Australia, and once I found Mykal's page online, saw his amazing content, I was super keen to reach out to him and connect and to get him on the podcast to share some things and to educate me and to educate all of you as well. So, once again, once the episode is finished, please go and check out all of Mykal's links at the Gardener's Lodge, and you'll find those all in the show notes. But yeah, first and foremost, let's dive straight into the conversation. This is Mykal from the Gardener's Lodge.
The reason I guess I chose natives was actually more of um, I wanted to like set a point of difference from myself to other content creators.
Hmm.
Um, and I wanted to have a niche effectively. So I know that's a very boring answer, but I love
No,
natives. I've
yeah,
always loved natives. Um, I grew up in far north Queensland,
beautiful.
where the climate and the natives it was tropical, isn't it? So
Hmm.
it's completely different. And then now that I live in the Blue Mountains, it's just wild to me how different uh, and adaptable natives are.
Right.
Um, because we have such a vast climate in Australia, it is I just find magical. I actually just find them magical. I find the systems that they use to feed themselves in our really depleted soils super interesting. I also found that the knowledge online about natives is actually fairly limited.
Mm.
Like even where I live now, like I'll try and ID something, a plant, and I'll be like, there's nothing on this. Like I can usually work out what it is, but you
Yeah.
find a website and it's like it grows to 3 meters and that's about it. There's no kind of like dense information. Um, yeah, so that's
You're
sort of why
bridging that
native.
gap.
Yeah, exactly. So I enjoy learning it. So I enjoy departing it. I wouldn't say that I'm actually specifically interested in natives myself. Like
Right.
I'm into gardening. I'm into all forms of gardening. Um, uh, and natives is sort of what I have landed on as like a true love, a passion,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I'm just as passionate about like tropical indoor houseplants. Well,
Yeah.
tropical plants as well, but like obviously down here, I know they need
Yeah.
to be indoors. But yeah, so that would be kind of the real reason why I guess I kind of landed on natives. Yeah.
That's awesome. I like the idea though that you said it's just you're just a gardener. You love gardening.
Yeah,
But you do have to have something that you tend to kind of lean towards because doing everything is probably a little bit overwhelming for most people.
absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah.
I think in the way that I kind of even got into gardening was by having a garden, really.
Mm,
So when we bought this house, we're on a quarter of an acre.
I see.
And the garden was an absolute mess. It was filled with weeds and black privets and Pittosporum undulatum, which is a native, but it's a
Yes.
very weedy plant.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and what the idea was to build a wildlife garden, and
Cool.
first and foremost, really. And what attracts wildlife? Well, natives, right?
Natives.
Of
Mm.
course, of course, like other plants do as well, but I wanted to attract like yeah, I wanted to bring a bit of the bush home, if that makes
Hmm.
sense.
Yeah.
But
Native
yeah,
plants for native wildlife. That kind of makes sense, right?
yeah, exactly, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's right.
I think that's a massive thing. Couple of points there that kind of just like came up in my head. One was like
Mm,
the difference, I guess, between you uh, living in far north Queensland to Blue Mountains and the adaptability that you said of native species.
yeah.
Are you seeing the same species in both parts, both climates, just adapted differently, or are they different species or different versions or genuses of each of these species, if you know what I
S-
mean? Like,
Yeah, so um, you don't really get the same. You get the same species like eucalypts
yeah,
or melaleucas or
yes, yeah.
all of that, but you won't get this exact same plant, you know?
Hmm.
So particularly up in the Blue Mountains where I live, it's a quite a localized climate. It's a
Yeah.
cool climate.
Hmm.
Um, and so there's species up here that we don't have anywhere else in Australia. They're like,
Cool.
and they're listed as endangered, but only because they're geographically kind of locked to like the cliff faces here and things like
Yeah.
that.
Wow.
So, but back to your question, there's not really the same species between like tropical and here.
Yeah.
Um, but the when I was talking about the adaptability, more what I meant with that was that we have like such depleted soils in Australia,
Mm.
and particularly in the mountains, they're just eroded, they're ancient, they're old, there's very little structure to them.
Hmm.
Um, and plants thrive.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about that's sort of like why I love natives is that like they're eking out an existence in something that like they shouldn't probably,
Yes.
you know what
You
I mean? And
seeming,
like
yeah. Seemingly it's
um
like how? Like impossible, you know?
exactly, yeah. But you'd certainly do like there is very little in common between like far north Queensland.
Mm.
So I grew up about I don't know, 15 minutes south of the Daintree River.
Oh wow. Beautiful.
Um, yeah, in a place called Rocky Point, which is just not a town, but it's a
No,
kind of
yeah.
yeah.
Oh,
But yeah, so I kind of grew up there and fell in love with the rainforest, rainforest fruits. Um, we were kind of close to the beach.
yeah.
And
Gorgeous.
so we sort of had, I had this like quite like idyllic upbringing on an acre. It was a bit over an acre. Like my
Wow.
parents had a huge veggie garden, and I had to mow the lawn every day, you know, every
Yeah.
week rather
Yeah.
was my job as a kid. And that's sort of where I really fell in love with kind of gardening, I suppose.
Mm.
My mum says she's not a good gardener at all,
But it's the
but like I don't
exposure,
believe it.
isn't it? Yeah, it's just being
Exactly.
out there and having that. I've found that such a common thread. Like people who grow up around it and have that, they just have a better appreciation for nature and the joy of it and what it brings for you. Um, and I read somewhere on one of your things about how like you were kind of thinking that everybody had this sort of access to that kind of lifestyle and everyone just kind of jumped off cliffs and went swimming in the river and like
Yeah.
was around the gardens, but it's like everyone like most people are so detached from that and so far from that. Um,
That's right. I mean, yeah, growing up in the country and in kind of yeah, in the tropics, it was idyllic. Like I have no and my partner grew up in London
oh
and
wow.
like I don't know that life.
Yeah,
Do
yeah,
you know what I
so
mean?
different. Yeah.
And I can't even kind of fathom what that is if in
Mm,
a way.
totally, yeah.
Like I've lived in cities now, but like it's not for me.
Yeah.
But it yeah, so like growing up surrounded by nature and surrounded by beauty and like, like you said, swimming in, now people are going to think I'm crazy for saying swimming in like rivers and whatnot,
Yeah,
but
in
like,
far North Queensland.
yeah, just
Croc
Croc
Central.
Central.
Yeah.
You got to swim past,
Yeah.
a waterfall where the crocs aren't going to get to.
Oh my goodness.
Um, but yeah, and like even like spending my dad and my brother-in-law were big fishermen, and we
Yeah.
would be boating on the Daintree River, and going out fishing and camping
Wow.
and all of that kind of stuff kind of made me fall in love with it, um, with the natural environment in general.
Mm.
And then moving away from that area and living in cities, I became super hungry for it again. Like I just yearned, and I'm sure you're the same,
Yeah.
I
Totally
just
understand.
yearned for the nature, and then started coming out to the Blue Mountains, and that's where I really started to reconnect again. Was here, and even seeing here the because we have sort of like rainforests here, like
Mm.
kind of cool temperate rainforests, in the gullies, and
Yeah.
just seeing that like the plants look similar, like the way that environment changes the bark on plants and the leaves,
Mm.
um, is kind of fascinating. And it reminded me so much of home. But then, you kind of leave that zone and then you're into a very harsh environment that,
Yeah.
the plants have really tight, thin leaves because they've had to adapt to like harsh conditions in like sunlight and wind.
Yeah.
Um, and I find that super interesting that you can kind of have those two things so closely connected to each other and but expressing completely differently.
Mm. Yeah, and it's that microclimate, as you said before, because like going back to kind of the difference between up north and down south where you are
Mm.
now, the thread I was thinking is like not necessarily obviously the adaptability of a species. Like you couldn't just pick one up out of the ground and then throw it down where you are and it would thrive. But it's more that there is localized adaptation and having stuff that's local and has adapted over time locally makes it what it is, and it makes that environment nice and cohesive and sort of like works together with everything else. It's very symbiotic with what's going on there. And even like something you said before about having a sort of a gap in the native knowledge where you can't find much knowledge on a species. It's a lot because it's kind of maybe indigenous knowledge, like from what I understand, that kind of, you tend to, if you go through with an elder who knows an area, they'll be able to pick out, okay, these are all your tucker plants, these are all your medicinal plants, and they know and they pass it down like that. And there's not been too many people that turn it into some content and some information to be able to share to people and kind of give them that side of the story. Because anytime I've seen, native gardens or something or anyone talking about natives, they're either talking about sort of giving a bit of a nod to the country that we live in and including some natives and
Yeah.
ones that might look pretty or ones they can't like, et cetera, et cetera. But they're not necessarily thinking too much about the, okay, these ones are local to the area. They're going to attract local wildlife and like even the local native bees. I was chatting to a guy who's big into the native bees and he was saying like the local
The
indigenous
Clancy.
species. Yeah, Clancy. Yeah.
Nice.
You know him. Yeah,
I've
that's awesome.
interviewed him as well.
No way. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah,
He's
yeah.
he's a legend. And
He's a legend.
yeah, so he was saying yeah about these indigenous species and how like they have this kind of relationship already pre-built in with local native species, and that's some way of really introducing those into your gardens. And I think a lot of people miss that point, don't they? It's like they don't understand that native knowledge is kind of there for a reason and it's been passed down for so long and it's such an important thing to consider.
Well, that's exactly right. And that, like, even you mentioning that, it's sort of like we've really lost our way when it comes to taking care of the land.
Mm.
I'm thinking about like cultural burning, um, what that does to plant species, why native plants need that.
Yeah.
Like
Can you go
our,
into that a little bit
yeah,
if
of
you
course. So, I've been racking my brains actually on how to make pieces of content about this topic because it's actually quite a complex kind of topic. But um, okay, so Indigenous people burnt land in very specific times of the year, uh, very cold burns. So it doesn't mean like a big raging bushfire. It's
yeah.
just a slow fire that kind of rumbled across the surface,
Mm.
cleaning up the leaf litter. Um, And there's a lot of native plants that are really, they only set seed once the fire's passed through, and
Wow.
they will only, uh, their seeds will, even if they're laying in the ground, will only germinate after they have had a fire or like been exposed to smoke.
Wow.
So once it rains after that, then they're able to start to grow,
Yeah, they get the
start to
signal.
germinate. Yeah, exactly. They get the signal. And so when you start looking at native forests, when a fire hasn't been through, the leaf litter's, that thick, you're starting to get a lot of weeds come through this space.
Mm.
Um, you're getting overcrowding. Our like native forests at the moment are really dense
Hmm.
and really impenetrable, but that wasn't like that before colonization and before like we settled in
Right.
Australia. It was far more open because the fires were coming through. It also, we've got so Banksias are one of these plants that germinate through fire, right? So
Cool.
their cones open up, shoot the seed out, and then once it rains after the bushfire, then they'll germinate and grow. Now, when you go into these like forests, particularly around here, like on the cliff tops, there's not many young Banksias. They're
Yeah,
all
okay.
very old. So there's not that kind of next generation of plants that is actually coming
I
up.
see the
But when
succession.
you go into spaces that have been backburned by like rural fire services,
Hmm.
it's completely different.
Yeah.
You have the young plants coming through. You have species that will only, like almost annuals, that will only come out when a fire's passed through. And so um,
Wow.
you kind of just have a completely different environment. Now, before I mentioned that in my garden there was Pittosporum undulatum, that is a native plant
Hmm.
that it grows, supposed to grow in really cool, damp areas,
Hmm.
particularly in the Blue Mountains. They have big orange seeds that native birds love, and then
Wow.
they eat them, and then they poop them out, and they
Spread it
spread
everywhere.
everywhere.
Yeah.
So that plant's now considered a weed in most parts throughout Australia because we're not burning.
Hmm.
That particular species can't withstand fire. So birds are, eating them up here, taking them away, flying down into, I don't know, down the coast.
Yeah.
Then they're growing in those spaces. They're using, that's actually a very adaptable plant. Like that plant, you could literally probably put anywhere and it'd go,
Right.
just by the by. But
Yeah.
so the plant is growing in where it's not local, where it's not endemic. It's fighting for resources. It's shading out other natives. There's no fire coming through to stop it.
Hmm.
So you've got two problems. It's taking all the resources, light, food,
Hmm.
everything, and then there's no fire for like the Banksias and other species to germinate themselves. So you've got an ecosystem that is in complete decline because you aren't using fire effectively.
Do you think that's something that like say because we are leaving areas and bushlands, like is that something that naturally bushfires would come through at a certain like nature just makes it happen or like is it something the indigenous worked out and were like okay, if we burn, that means it's better for the health of the bushland or the forest, whatever it is. Because it's like it seems
Yeah,
like a very human intervention, and it seems like something that without us doing that, nature would kind of get lost in that and just be covered in weeds. Or is that something that, like, if we left it untouched, it would sort itself out? Do you know what I mean by that?
I do know what you mean by that. Look, I can't really speak too
That's a
much
very hard
on.
question.
Oh yeah, I can't speak too much on like indigenous practices because I'm like not of that culture. I don't know exactly,
Yeah.
but it is said that they were specifically purposely doing it. You know, if you
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
about indigenous cultures, they evolved with the plant species,
Hmm.
and so uh, who knows when the first kind of
Yeah.
when they first started doing it, but what you end up with is what we saw in 2019 with the Black Summer fires, right?
Yeah.
Where leaf litter is so thick, so dense, um, the fire burns so incredibly hot. It's
Mm.
jumping the canopies in the trees, which
Hmm.
is just terrible. Trees,
Yeah.
like a lot of our natives can withstand fire, very,
Mm.
very adapted to withstand fire.
Yeah.
Either they've like a tuber-like system. There's mallee species of eucalypts up here actually that have a tuber-like system under the ground. A bushfire comes through, and within, I don't know, a week, there's new shoots coming out
Wow. That's amazing.
out of its root system. And a lot of the eucalypts will um, be absolutely fine with a light fire.
Mm.
They'll continue living happily. The problem that you get is when it's actually burning in the canopies and it's burning at a
Mm.
really high heat.
Hmm.
There's a space. There's some bushland that burnt during the 2019 fires, which is no more. It is
Wow. Like it
basically
completely decimated it.
there would have been trees there that would have been hundreds of years old that are just not stumps, but like dead
Yeah.
sticks.
Wow.
And of course, the things are growing up now. It's all kind of like it'll
Yeah.
regenerate itself, but that has been lost. Like the larger trees have been lost from that space. Now, that's
Yeah.
not every bushfire is not going to do that, right? But when you're talking about cultural burning, you're talking about using that cool fire to
Mm.
prevent really big fires. So I
Yeah.
imagine that Indigenous people realize that, like, hey, if we burn slowly at the cooler times of the year, vast swathes of land, we're not gonna
We're
be
not going to lose
fleeing,
everything. Yeah.
yeah, exactly, massive fires, which
That
is
makes a lot
terrifying.
of sense. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The reason I just kind of thought of that is because, like, in my experience with things in nature, like there's a lot of symbiotic relationships between plants, between
Yeah,
animals, between pests. So certain things only survive because there's something else that only survives doing this, and there's something else that they rely on, and blah blah blah. And
yeah,
like
exactly.
it's often thought that we're separate from that, and we're just kind of like, sitting back watching. But then parts of me think, is that part of our purpose? There's certain roles that we have in this cycle that it needs us for, like in that regard to ultimately thrive. Like there are different pieces that I don't know, that's just kind of where my brain goes a little bit deep into that. And I sort of think, is there a role that us as human beings are playing in this cycle, and certain things that we are able to do to have an impact on bushland, like this slow burning, actually helps it to thrive and do better. So
Mhm.
when that's missing, then there are like imbalances and it's not a balanced ecosystem. So we might be part of the balanced ecosystem in that way. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but that's just kind of where my brain goes.
I agree, and I think that we've as a species have lost touch with the fact that we are a part of nature. We're animals,
Yeah.
um, and we're seeing the detrimental effects of that with the climate crisis.
Yeah, totally.
Um, so yeah, you're exactly right. We are a part of the ecosystem. We're just not doing the right things at the moment to
Yeah.
make it flourish.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of stuff too, like with environmental protections that the government should be doing more of. Um, you know, but it comes down to each and every one of us to do the right thing,
Yeah, yeah,
to make sure that
exactly.
we're treating the land properly, to make sure that we're, even if you're not a gardener, like don't litter,
Yeah, totally.
don't
It's
kind
pretty
of,
simple.
yeah, very
Exactly.
simple.
Yeah.
Um,
No, I know what you mean.
yeah, so I think you're right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Like we are a part of the symbiosis with the earth, but at the moment we've lost our way.
Yeah,
Most people, not
it just
everyone.
makes me think about it like that, going like, there's all of these indigenous tribes and the knowledge that comes from that, like they were kind of part of it. So it just, yeah, it makes me kind of go down that direction. But let's um let's jump back to your garden that you created where you are now in
Oh
the Blue
yeah.
Mountains. And just kind of talk about like, so you mentioned it was kind of full of a bit of weeds and things when you first started and
Oh
you
my
first
God,
rocked
yeah.
up. Can you talk to me a little bit about the thought behind setting up a native garden and like how you might approach this with other people in the sort of consulting work that you do as well? What are the first few things that you're looking at and considering when trying to kind of plan or think about what species you want? Is there a few kind of directions you can go and what's that like?
Yeah. So first I'll start with my garden.
Yeah,
So yeah,
cool.
you're right. It was actually a cool climate, ornamental garden. So lots of big rhododendrons, lots of azaleas. There was agapanthus everywhere, which is a weed here,
Yeah, wow.
though not a listed weed, but it's
Yeah.
like escapes into bushland and it's
Mm.
terrible. Same in Victoria.
Yeah.
Um, there was a lot of Pittosporum undulatum. I don't live in one of those kind of cool gullies.
Yeah.
I have a sloped block as well, so
Okay.
that presented challenges.
Hmm.
Effectively, what did I start with? Um, what I started with here is probably actually quite different to what I would tell people to start with
Okay.
for my work, because here I was doing it out of love.
Right.
So we kind of just went for it. But you know, soil, everything comes back to soil health.
Yes.
So, uh, being that we were in there was some form of an existing cool climate garden here. We just had to make sure that the natives could handle that soil, which they
Yeah.
could. We actually got very lucky. We got very good soil here.
Cool.
Um, and yeah, so what I've done in the front garden is actually I left a lot of the healthy things, the things that weren't weeds. So I've still got rhododendrons, and
Gorgeous.
deciduous trees and aces um, but then I've planted around with natives.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons we did that is yeah, as I mentioned before, wanted to bring wildlife in.
Yeah.
B, we actually have a wild plant rescue locally here, which a lot of places do. So it's a charity, and I could get tube stock for a couple of bucks.
That's awesome.
And so it was nice and cheap to be able
Yeah.
to actually build, to plant out the garden. And we got a little bit obsessive and like to the point where we'd just start bringing things home and being like, there's no room.
Room. I know that feeling.
But in saying that, I did that with this garden, but that's not how I would approach or tell someone to approach a garden that they're trying to set up,
Okay.
right?
Right.
So if I think planning is key.
Mhm.
Planning what you want it to look like, planning the species you want. I recommend that people stick to a palette of tw 12 to 16 species in a garden. Um, because then you end up with a much co more cohesive design and look.
And for the
Um,
diversity, right?
yeah, I suppose like also if you look at natural environments, you have that repetition in the natural
Mm,
environments.
mm.
So yeah, but the native plant nursery here enabled me to get endemic species. So species that were local to here,
Perfect.
which was great because you can get a heap of natives online, of course you can, but when I see my garden, I notice that the insects that are local up here, there's far more of them around the endemic plants
Yeah.
versus kind of other species that I've kind of purchased from nurseries or other nurseries rather, or that aren't
Yeah.
endemic.
That's what we were
Um,
going back to what we said before about just having localized, adapted varieties that just thrive well. Yeah. They know,
exactly,
already know that they're meant to be here and everything else does
exactly.
too.
Yeah, exactly. And the beauty of it is that like you don't need to change the soil that much. These
Mm.
species, particularly if they're hyperlocal, they'll live in the soil
Yeah.
happily
Yeah.
because that's what they've kind of, adapted to. So
Yeah.
you don't need to go bringing in like all new soil and a whole heap of compost when you build out your garden. You can just bung them in,
Yeah.
more or less.
Yeah.
Um, so what I was also saying before about the soil is that having a cool climate garden here, we know that people would have been putting a lot of compost in, and the soil is quite rich. And a lot of natives, particularly natives that are from drier zones or coastal zones, are phosphorus sensitive.
Mm.
Um, and what that is you'll hear whenever people talk about native gardens, like you have to use a native only fertilizer.
Yeah.
But like what that effectively is saying is there's a big truck just going by my house, sorry.
That's okay.
Um, so what the phosphorus sensitivity really is the plants are really actually very, very, very good at finding soft phosphorus within our soils. So
Mm.
it's not that they're just like super sensitive and don't like phosphorus. They do, but they're very, very, very good at finding the very small trace amounts.
Hmm.
So they've got um, a big like mat web-like root system, and it has nodules that are called proteids. And what they do is they send roots really far down and eke
Mm.
out as much phosphorus as they can. So when you come along and then you put on a regular fertilizer, um, you're just giving it way too much, and it's just going, oh my God, yes.
Yeah.
And then it goes, no,
Yeah.
I can't handle this. Please stop.
Yeah.
So, but ways around that is to feed organically. I don't use a lot of like synthetic chemical fertilizers.
Awesome. Yeah.
I
Awesome.
use mostly mulch.
Yeah.
I have chooks. I
Cool.
compost the manure. You don't want to put chook manure on natives just fresh because it's
Yeah.
just way too strong.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, feeding very small amounts, very lightly goes a very long way because
Mm.
in I think up until about the 70s, there was a train of thought that you shouldn't feed natives at all, which I can see why, but like
Yeah.
they do perform better when they are fed well.
Yeah.
But yeah, as I said, the easiest way to feed is organically.
Mm.
So um, compost is good, aged compost. You don't
Yeah.
want it to be too strong and very small amounts.
Mm.
Liquid teas as just a
Yes.
tonic, like just grabbing some grass, shoving it into a bag and putting it into a bucket, letting that soak for a few weeks, and
Yeah.
then kind of diluting that. That's great. Um, what else do we do? We do mulching. People don't equate mulching to feeding plants, but
It is.
if you use a variety of mulch, so if you've got like a native wood chip or something like that, that's going to break down and feed the soil.
Hmm.
But what you don't want to do is just start like layering on the same thing year after year because it's
Yes.
all going to break down into certain nutrients. You want to kind of mix up what
Yeah.
woods are being used, and um, leaf litter is a great thing as well. Um, because that's going to break down and become available within the soil in years to come.
Hmm.
People talk about nitrogen drawdown as well when it comes to mulching,
Yeah, they do.
um, which is effectively like where you put the mulch down and the way it breaks down, it absorbs nitrogen from the
From the
soil
soil. Yeah.
and then stops it being available to the plants around it. So to avoid that, I use that is when I will use this very small amount of fertilizer underneath it,
Yeah.
a native fertilizer underneath it, just when I apply it. And that's only when I'm establishing a garden. I'm not going to do that, every time.
Hmm.
That's because really that nitrogen drawdown only really affects the plants that you're trying to feed there, if you know what I mean.
Yes,
Like the
yes.
young plants, not
Hmm.
like mature established trees. Like
Yeah.
they don't care.
They don't worry. Yeah. You're right.
Yeah.
I think that's really important to know. And like you said, like with the natives, like they are very good and very well adapted at finding stuff in pretty arid soils. And but you're
Yeah.
then trying to like to make it better, you can kind of mimic the forest floor a bit, add a bit of diversity of mulches, and kind of control it to the best of
Yep.
your ability and kind of give them the most optimum environment to be able to thrive, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I suppose, you know, we've all been to the bush, and the bushland looks fantastic when it's all like together and mixed through. But a lot of those plants are really spindly, right? They're not
Yeah. Hmm.
shapely. They're not really what you want in your home garden. Well, some
Yeah.
people, I
No, I
probably
know what
would.
you mean.
Um, and so when you're feeding it with like organic products, you're helping the plant to look more like a garden plant and get the
Mm,
results out of it that you want for a home garden,
true.
which is what I love to do. The other thing that's actually really important when you're establishing really any garden, but particularly a native garden, is tip pruning.
Yeah,
Tip
okay.
pruning all your plants so
Yeah.
that you get the nice full
The shape.
shrubs,
Yeah.
um, helps them create branches and just ends up being far more attractive. And
Hmm.
so like those two things combined you end up with a much nicer looking native garden than with if you just chuck something in and then it just kind of grows into one spindly thing, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Um,
that's such a good point because I've done that before, like
mm,
planted things that are natives. Like we had little sidetrack. We had this cool initiative. You might have heard for it, but it was called Weeds for Trees Day, and it was our local, I guess, like native nursery, and you
mm,
could bring a bag or a box full of weeds that you'd pulled up from your garden, and they gave you specific ones to try and get rid of, like because we want to try and get rid of certain ones. And then you could trade that for a token, which you could go and then get a little rootstock of a native. So I went
wow.
bananas and just like went around and just grabbed a whole bunch of bags of weeds, went to other people's houses. I'm weeding your garden, blah blah, and stole some weeds. And then got all these yeah, root stocks and things and planted them in various different places, my house and other people's houses and things. And you're absolutely right. A lot of them, when left to their own device, just become what they will be, but they weren't just like this kind of pretty thing that you can have in a garden that like that sort of fit. It seemed like it was kind of like I was trying to create wild bushland, and a lot of
Yep.
native gardens kind of have that tendency to seem pretty wild looking, and
Yeah.
to get it looking, yeah, refined and have it like
Manicured, I
this.
suppose. Yeah.
Exactly, manicured. Yeah, that's the right word. Like, do you find that that's something that a lot of people miss with creating it?
Yeah, I think people don't like people love native gardens. Like it's
Yeah,
having a massive resurgence. Like pretty much everyone I see is like, I want to build a native garden and da da da.
awesome.
Da. So that's great. But yeah, I mean, I think people do kind of um think that native can mean low maintenance. And that's
Yeah,
not necessarily true. I mean, it can. You can
yeah.
certainly just chuck plants in the ground, and I recommend anyone to do that. But if you can, like to get them looking mint,
Yeah.
it is important to take care of your plants, to feed, to shape them, to give them a bit of love,
Hmm.
It is
Yeah,
important, and it is something that people don't think about particularly much with natives, I think.
that's cool because yeah, it kind of looks wild or unkept if they're not like sort of yeah looked after a little
Which is
bit.
kind of a vibe too. I mean,
True. It is. It depends what you want.
yeah,
There's so many options.
yeah. I think
That's
too, there's an interesting thing you've just kind of it's just popped to my head. I think people think native garden is like a style of garden.
yeah,
It's not
true.
really a style. You could have a formal native garden. You know,
Mm,
it's you're just using a palette of plants that are from this area, right? Um, from Australia, obviously. But you know, with Stringer, for example, you can topiary them into like beautiful little balls and have
yeah.
like a really kind of like more formal look with it, or you can let them go wild. You can, design them into like a more cottage style. You can,
Mm,
um, th- it's more of like, or I almost say it's like using natives. It's like that's the palette, but then what do you want the actual
yes.
vibe, look, or aesthetic of the garden to be after that?
Totally.
And then
Yeah.
that's where you can go. Because if you want to replant a bushland, go ahead. It's very hard to get that to happen because, we're not nature.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so people say, oh, I want a native garden. I'm like, okay, what do you want it to look like? Yeah.
Yeah, and that would come into a lot of your consultation, kind of just asking people like, how do you envisage the end goal of this? Like,
Yeah.
what do you want it to look like? How do you want to, how much maintenance time have you got? How hands off do
Yes.
you want it to be? That type of thing.
Yeah.
And then working with that. Something obviously we can move into a little bit now, talking about maintaining plants, is
Mm.
your love for indoor plants.
Oh,
And
yeah.
um, I'm going to go straight out on a limb and say that they're the most neglected plants in my house. Um, because you can tend to kind of you think, well, for me anyway, I go out and I go, yeah, okay, I'm going out and tending to the garden, I'll feed everything and blah blah blah. But then the ones inside I forget to feed as often, forget to water as often. But
Yeah.
that's just me. And I think a lot of people just use them as a bit of a set and forget. But there's a
It's
few
not.
that it's not. No, it's certainly not. And especially for those tropical ones, as I'm
Mm.
sure you're aware, they can be super finicky. I've found certain varieties just aren't cohesive for me to grow because I cannot keep up with their needs. Um, so I like in terms of your house plants and things like that, how do you select? For which ones are going to work well in your house and where? Is it a trial and error system? Because that's how it worked for me. I would kind of go, I've got this plant that I really like the look of. It says it needs high humidity, so I'm going to throw it in the bathroom or something. Needs some nice filtered light or whatever it might be. And then kind of just go from there and go, okay, it didn't work well there or it did work well here and move them around.
So can I just pick you up on one thing? So when
Yes.
you said high humidity, right?
Yes.
People think of a bathroom, sorry, I just tapped my mic. People think of a bathroom as like a really high humid area, and it is for short periods of time.
True.
But bathrooms generally go through quite like wild swings in temperatures. So they
True.
get real hot
Yeah.
when you've got the shower on and running, then they get real cold because you've probably got tiles. And
Yes.
so they're actually quite a difficult spot to grow things in.
Thank you.
A lot of
Because,
people's bathrooms are a little bit dark too.
yeah,
Um, but in answer to your question, yes, I am obsessed with houseplants. I always have been. I've never not had houseplants.
that's so cool.
Um, think last count I had 80 something in my house, which is a lot.
Wow.
It's a lot of work, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, how do I select? So I don't actually go for the really like sought after houseplants. That's not, I don't care. Like I'm not a big like, oh my God, this rare
You're
plant.
like Thai
They're usually,
consolation.
yeah, like no, I don't want one. Uh so they're usually very hard to take care of. They're
Yeah.
kind of there's a reason that they're not
Yes.
as in cultivation and not as readily available because
Hmm.
they're not that easy to take care of. So I go for some of the most boring plants, but they look good.
Yeah. Hmm.
There's no point. I don't ever think having a plant that is looking sad is good.
Yeah.
Like, and a lot of the time, those rare ones that do need a lot of humidity, people try and like mist every day and all that kind
Yeah.
of stuff. Like,
Yeah.
that's like they're very difficult, right? And the whole idea is to like, you don't want this like houseplants to be a bore. Like, they're
Mhm.
there to bring you joy, you don't
Yeah.
need more chores, although there are chores that are obviously involved with them. But yeah, so I go for very boring. Now, I think a lot of people make the mistake of thinking houseplants that say low light can take no light, but that's not the case. Every plant needs light. Uh, I group mine around windows. Sorry, I'm just looking around at them all like
Yeah, no, it's a good, yeah. It helps you kind
um,
of understand, go, oh yeah, that's that for this reason.
yeah. So I group them around windows, I cluster them together. If you put more plants together, they actually can not feed off each other, but they start to build their own little kind of climate, like get a bit of humidity going around
I
them.
had heard that.
I live in a very like it's cool climate up here. It's not where they should be, but I find that I have no troubles. I know other people who have big troubles, but I also have a lot of light in this house.
Mm.
Um, I think people also make the mistake, like I've got a client who is forever trying to grow an olive inside. And just like in your garden where it's like right plant, right place,
Mm.
it's the same thing indoors. You can't just bring anything in.
No.
Um, so obviously, generally, mostly they're tropical.
Yes.
Um, uh, Anything with a variegation, I kind of go, sorry, mate, you're not for me. Um, as a style thing, I'm not a big fan of variegated leaves, just a personal preference. But
Yeah, okay.
also, when you have like your Thai constellation, which isn't too bad, but I can't think what the other one's called. The one where it's more white on it.
And it's good, literally, they have the split down the middle, some of them, and they got
Yeah,
white
I think
one
it's like
side. The
Elba or something.
Yeah, I can't remember.
It's white. I can't remember either. But effectively, like people get really sad when they're like growing these plants and they're like got a green, like yeah, half green, half white. That white is really unstable,
Hmm.
so it's gonna go brown like
Yeah.
pretty quick after it's grown that leaf is unfurled, it's not going to stay white. And then I think people get very disappointed and very disheartened with them because they're like, it just looks like crap. Like, yeah, it does because it's not supposed to be like that. Like,
Yeah.
those variegations are generally like viruses that
And
have
they're
been bred.
engineered into there specifically. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So yeah, and then the other thing people make a big mistake with is fertilizing those plants because when you're feeding something with nitrogen, obviously the plant's going to
Yeah.
produce more green leaves.
Yes.
And so yeah, anyway, but I why don't I run you through really quick my like houseplant like recipe or like
Yeah.
care guide, right?
Please, please. That'd be awesome.
So, um I keep them on the dry side, right? So plants go to plant heaven with overwatering.
Yeah.
House plants are generally better kept in somewhat dry soil. Like you'll buy a plant and it'll say, moist, well drained, or something like that. But the reality is, moist isn't really what they want. They
Yeah.
want a soil on the drier side. You've got to think about a lot of the tropical plants too, or the vining plants. They grow up a tree. So
Mm.
the water that they're actually only getting is trickles past.
Yeah.
So, when it rains in the rainforest, they just get a little brush of water through the bark on the tree that they're kind of latched onto.
Yeah.
So drier for the most part. I water probably, I think it's about once a week,
Hmm.
um, ish. But what I do have is a plant that when it's like a canary in a coal mine kind of situation where like, is that the right term? I don't know. Where when it starts to droop, I know that, okay, action time. We've got to water everything because that's the first one that'll kind of be like, oh,
Ah, yes.
so that's kind of how I know. And then, of course, I think people make the mistake of not checking the soil every time you water
Hmm.
because, it's in a pot. If you keep watering, there might be water sitting in the bottom of the pot and then it's actually like just sopping wet all the time. So
Hmm.
always checking with your finger in each plant gets tedious. But I think even though I have like heaps of houseplants, like I kind of have got it down to about like a 30-minute watering regime now.
That's really good.
Yeah, it's not bad, hey.
Are you
Um,
bringing them all into one place to water them, or are you going
no,
around and watering
I'm
where
going
they are?
around.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'm just going around with a watering can.
Yeah.
Um, I'll get onto that in a minute actually, because once a year I do, but I'll explain why.
Yeah.
But before we do that, the second thing is fertilizing. During the warmer months or the growing season, I don't just use the calendar of being like, no, it's summer or it's spring, it's time to start fertilizing. I start to watch for plant growth, a little bit of plant
Mm,
growth, and I feed with an organic uh, fertilizer. So actually, it's power feed.
yeah. Yeah.
Um, and 'cause it doesn't really smell when it's, well, it does, but
That's a
when
big
it's
thing for
diluted
indoor one,
down.
isn't it? Indoor plants,
Y-
like you do, like I've had that a lot with people who are just like, what do I feed? Do I feed them the fish emulsion? I was like, no, don't do that inside your house. Like you can
I
get
mean, you
away
can,
with,
but
well, yeah, exactly. You will just be smelling like fish. Exactly. So
yeah,
yeah, you don't want smelly stuff.
exactly. So then, yeah, so that happens basically every second watering during the
Okay.
growing season.
Mm,
Um, I also find that being in a cooler climate here, the house stays warmer in winter because I've got the fireplace on. So
cool.
I actually see a heap more growth out of some of my plants, not all of them,
Yeah.
during actually the like winter, which
Wow.
is quite bizarre, but it's just because the house is generally staying warmer than it would be during kind
Jeez.
of the autumn or the spring where there's no
Yeah.
fire. In summer, we still get growth as well. So they're kind of a bit erratic in that sense.
That's kind of cool.
Um, Now, once a year, I get all of the houseplants and I get a couple of big buckets, like gardening tubs.
Yeah.
I fill it up with water and I put in fish emulsion, all of the kind of gross, smelly stuff. And then I soak them and wait individually, one by one, weight them down, soak them in the tub, and until I don't see any air bubbles coming through. And what that does is it just like
Wow.
really rehydrates the soil because often you can get hydrophobic soils in your house plants because, and when you water, it's just
It
following the
goes
same
down the
path
side or
through.
something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that kind of alleviates that. And then at that same time, that is when I will do any uppotting I need to do. Everyone will get a neem spray at that point just
Yes.
because they're all
Pests.
out of the house and I
Yeah.
can, get it
Yeah.
done. And that's for pests, of which I never really struggle with pests. I've only actually one of the one that really bugs me is actually a shawfly. I've got a shawfly problem. Do you know what they
Right.
are? They're like
Yes.
a fungus gnat, but
Well, that's
bigger.
yeah. Fungus gnats was one of the ones I was going to mention for indoor plants because often you can, if you are overwatering and you've got, often some slightly dead leaves or like even if they're quite like bushy over the actual soil surface itself, then you get a buildup of these things and then they're kind of just
Yes.
flying
So
everywhere.
they lay their eggs and have like a part of their life cycle within the soils,
Yes.
and then they uh, turn into the little flies like fungus gnats and short and then they'll just buzz around and annoy the hell out of you.
Yes.
Um, Fungus gnats I've actually never really had an issue with. It's the short flies for me. We
Okay.
brought in I purchased some large plants for my canoe.
Yes.
Probably
Yes.
explain that. I have a canoe hung um, in the middle of my house and it's filled with house plants.
It's so
Um,
good. I'm gonna recommend everyone goes and checks your Instagram for that video so you can see you putting
yeah.
it up because it is a really cool centerpiece.
Yeah, cheers. Yeah, so I brought in a Ripsalis that came from a wholesale nursery, and it clearly had shorefly eggs in it. And then, oh, it was like so traumatic because you'd be like, "Hey, everyone, come for dinner," and then there's just like all of these like flies buzzing around in the house, and you're like,
Yeah.
um, they're under control now.
Wonderful. What
But
did you
my
do?
partner has like tennis elbow from because we bought like a little fly
Oh, from
zapper.
going around. That's
So we
amazing.
did that. We used, and people, look, my insect lovers out there hate these, and I would never use them in the garden. But sticky traps, like the yellow sticky traps,
I say to
in
people use those for indoors because then they can, but they look unsightly once they've got all of the fungus
yeah,
gnats and stuff on them. But I mean, they do
they
work.
do. They work, yeah. So that kind of, so I yeah, used a multi-prong approach. And then I actually purchased oh the some beneficial insects.
Yeah, cool, cool.
So I can't, so I've blanked on what they actually are, but basically through the company Bugs for Bugs, I
Great
got
company.
these predatory wasps. I know
Hmm.
that I can't remember the actual species name. And I sprinkled them throughout not only that exact pot, but I sprinkled them throughout every pot in here. And I think that has been the big one that has
Really?
kind of helped. Now, every now and again, I see a couple of flies, but I don't mind so much
Hmm.
because I've paid and purchased those predatory wasps. They need something to eat, right? So they're gonna die themselves if I don't have a very small population somewhere.
Yes,
Um,
yes, definitely.
and so, like in most of the pots, I'm sure they've probably died. There was nothing to eat, but in particular up here, I guess there is still they're kind of working in balance to keep each other in control, and I'm kind of
Mm.
fine with that.
Yeah, you
It's
have to,
yeah,
like you say, you have, if you want the Predator Wasp to be in there to be able to take out anything that's getting over the top, they need to have some sort of food source. They can't, and
exactly.
it's the same out in the garden. Like, yeah, people say, "Oh, I want to completely get rid of aphids, but I want lots of ladybugs around." And it's like, well, you need some aphids for these ladybugs to come in and eat. So it's like that. It
Yeah,
is a balance. So you're gonna have to have some of the other. One thing I've seen people use is diatomaceous earth, and they will kind of sprinkle that on top of the soil surface. I know it can be a
yeah.
little bit powdery and like dust, like whatever inside, but is that something you've ever used before?
I no, I haven't. I have used it with a friend of mine who had fungus gnats, and she ended up throwing all her plants out. But anyway,
Right.
she bought a fungus gnat barrier, which is like a granules, and I imagined that it would have diatomaceous earth in
Mm,
it.
yeah.
That's
Okay.
I think that's probably what's in it. And it didn't work.
All
This didn't
right.
work. I
Okay.
would not. I think those fungus gnat barriers are just like the products that you'd buy from uh, a big hardware store. They just doesn't work. I don't think that works.
Yeah. I'm with you on that.
And I think a lot of people, even with indoor, even with all pest problems, right? It's obviously unsightly. Generally, when you have a big infestation, it means the plant isn't happy.
Mm,
Pests attack unhappy plants. This is
yes.
indoors and outdoors.
Yep.
So you've probably put something in the wrong spot, or
Hmm.
you're particularly indoors, you're probably overwatering, or
Yes.
um, even when you really like starve them of water, they're unhappy. They'll start to get pest problems.
Hmm.
Um, and it's the same in the garden, you know. You're so right in the sense that you need pests in a garden to make an ecosystem work.
Mm,
You're not going to have the good guys if you don't have the bad guys. Now,
yes.
if you can avoid, um, if you can live with a little bit of imperfection, which I think we all should,
Yes.
then you're going to have a much greater ecosystem building in your
Mm,
garden. I, let me think. I've never sprayed like white oil in my garden or in my house or anything.
yeah,
The only
cool.
product I ever use is neem oil,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
that's for like desperate times, call for desperate measures style stuff, you know?
Yeah.
Um, but generally I know that like, yeah, if you're being attacked, then you're not happy. There's something not right. So, you know, I need to feed the plant. I need
Yeah.
to give it more water. I need to wait and watch and don't overreact
Yes.
because particularly in an outdoor environment, you know, the good guys will come and they'll bash them up.
Hmm.
The goodies will be there
I
soon, you
love that you
know?
said, yeah, I love that, man. The way you put all of that is absolutely perfect. And I do talk about that, like, say, um, some of the talks I do about IPM, with the IPM pyramid being like there's certain like steps that you take before you get to that. Okay, I'm coming in with a solution. I'm going to spray it and just blitz everything. It
Yeah.
starts at the bottom with getting the optimum cultural conditions. So meaning like growing in the right season for vegetables and things like this, or like you said, in the right environment, the right amount of watering. Because as you say, the stress signals to the insects and things like this that it's under stress and it needs to be well. I guess a lot of these pests come in to do the decomposing work, and they get rid of a lot of that, like the stuff that's not functioning very well. So like
Hmm.
I talk about how somebody had 2 rows of kale in their garden, and one was like in like the most optimum conditions, and then the other one they kind of really put under stress, and the bugs only came and smashed the 1 row that was under stress, and they left the healthy one alone, which was like kind of this a bit of an eye-opening experience going, hey, like it's not necessarily the crop and then the pest comes in just to eat that crop. It's the stress and it's what you're putting the plant under that signals to these insects and things to come in and kind of clear it up. So
Exactly.
I love that you've pointed that out because um it's not commonly thought about, I guess, that's you want to keep them in these optimum conditions.
It's the same thing with like I have a client that's popping to my mind. Like I went to her house and she was like, the leaves are yellowing. I've got yellow leaves. I've got a fungal problem. And I went there on the guise that she was gonna get me to spray a whole bunch of fungicide around the
Yeah.
place, of
Yeah.
which I would never do.
Awesome.
And but then when I got there, I was like, it's just the time, like it wasn't autumn leaves, but it was like, in the middle of summer, you often get like a bit of a leaf turnover where there's new leaves growing.
Yeah.
Some yellow ones will drop. Um, and she was like, what's going on? And I was like, it's just nature.
Yeah. It's
Plants aren't perfect.
natural.
I'm not perfect. You're not perfect. No plant is going to be absolutely perfect.
Mm.
So even in my indoor house plants, like I know they're very healthy, but I still get leaves that die.
Yeah. That's
And I still
naturally
get,
what happens.
yeah, it's just life. So that's a thing too. I think with pest management or even IPM, the watching part is the most important. The
Mm,
watching and waiting and not overreacting.
I love that. That piece
Yeah.
of advice is probably perfect. Can you talk a little bit about like so with your indoor plants in terms of like what's that one behind? I can't quite make it out. Is that like a Addisona, like the cheese plant Monstera, or is that hanging?
It is. It's a different cultivar. I can't actually remember what it is. It was given to me as a gift. A lady
Cool.
uh purchased a lady just gave me a cutting and I've grown it from that.
That's amazing.
It's not your traditional Addisonii. Is that how you say it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I butcher all of the
Yeah.
names, but that's what
No,
I
me
I
too.
remember. Can you talk about just like a couple of houseplants that might be a good place to start for people? Like and or like
Sure.
simple
The
ones that are yeah, just simple ones that you
yeah.
find really easy and beautiful looking and any like for example, I'll give you an example, like a snake plant or mother-in-law's tongue is really awesome. It can survive inside and it also adds to the oxygen for you, cleanses the air and things like that indoors. So
Yeah.
is there any like other ones that you think are super simple and kind of not necessarily set and
Again,
forget, but
it's all about right place, right plant. But
mm,
my easiest go-to would just be like Monstera.
yeah.
Pretty much, I always have like I've never had any cultivar I've had of them. I've never had any issues.
Mm,
Begonias,
hmm.
they're not all begonias. Like I think they're a bit of a grandma plant, but begonias, I think there are some really cool ones that do really well inside. Let me just have a
They'll squiz around. I know that like say
philodendrons. There's like a heap of
oh,
philodendrons that are just so they're just easy and
mm,
they devil's ivy.
yeah.
Like these are all things like particularly that guy like it's almost bomb proof. I have one up in my spare room that like gets a look in like almost never.
Yeah, right.
Um, I have a lot of good light, so I also find a lot of Ripsalis quite easy. Not everyone will find that easy.
No.
Um, Actually, speaking of the boat, the whole idea with the boat is it comes in and out. It's on a pulley system.
Yeah.
So I can bring it down to water, but I specifically chose plants like Ripsalis that were, don't mind being way drier. So I actually only watered that. And this is probably bad of me, every like 6 weeks.
Well, if it works, and like a lot of like I correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought I saw like sort of more succulent based plants in there. So obviously
Yes,
they have better water holding capacity. They are like a lot of their flesh is full of water and they can store it and use it sparingly. So that makes a lot of sense.
exactly, exactly. And they don't mind being drier. Now, the thing with doing that though is that like it becomes more of a pest magnet because they're not as happy as they potentially could be, right? So
Yeah.
they're actually a plant that when I bring the boat down, I take them outside, I give them a really deep soak every single time, and then I do neem oil those every time just to be like
Right.
safe.
Wait, they're not planted in the boat, are they? They're still in pots.
No, they're just pots. Okay, actually that's a good point. They're just still in their pots.
Yeah,
Um, The boat is a Papua New Guinean canoe. No,
that's so
it's not a
cool.
canoe. Everyone yelled at me online. It's a dinghy. But I don't know what the local word
It
for
looks like a
it would
canoe,
be.
but
Yeah, I got ripped a new one on
okay. Well,
TikTok and
you're a plant person, not a boat person.
not a boat person. But yeah, so I didn't want to damage the inside of it by having to kind of put a sealant in
Turn it
there
into a
and
garden
all of
bed,
that.
basically. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But that's with all pots, all indoor plants. I'd never take them out of a plastic pot. They're always gonna sit, that plastic pot's always gonna sit inside a decorative pot.
Right.
So that's so that when I do need to transplant them, upsize the pot, I can just get them out nice and easy and move them on,
Mm.
um, and not damage the decorative pot. It also means that I can, it's so lame, but like style the house with like
No,
different pots
I
and move the
totally get
pots
it.
around and
Mm.
um so yeah, that's my recipe for success with those.
That's cool.
It is yeah, definitely leave them in the pots. But
Yeah,
yeah.
because definitely do the same thing. And like you can leave the decorative pot there and switch it out once you've potted something to something new, have some different things
Yeah,
in different places, change things around. It makes it so much easier because, I mean, I'm sure you've planted into a decorative pot and then realized that you can probably never get it out again without severely digging it out or breaking the pot. So it's
exactly. Yeah.
like
I
what do you
have
do?
a I have a client who is hell bent on decorative pot planting and then decorative pot smashing, of which I help
Well,
her. She's like 82, but I'm always breaking her pots because everything now is not healthy and needs to be out pot or needs the soil needs refreshing. And then I'm always like,
yeah.
Moira, why are you doing this to me?
Maybe
So I'm
she
training her
enjoys
out
it.
of it. But yeah, so yeah,
That's cool. A lot of something that just touching on watering, I do, or like again, these are the most neglected plants in my house. So this is
sure.
prefaced by that. But if I like, there's a lot of plants that I find do better with a similar to what you do with the bucket where you submerge it, where I sit it in like a tray of water and it will wick up the water underneath and come and sort of draw it up underneath. I was told, I have no idea which species it was originally, but I was told that that is a really good technique for indoor house plants and also to avoid the sort of soggy layer that turns out on top that causes the fungus gnats and things like this to do bottom watering where you sit them in the tray.
Yeah.
Have you had any experience with that or why that might be helpful, or is it not something you've really ever
It's
done?
not something I do. It's the similar though it's the similar reasoning as to what I do with the taking them out once a year and dunking them is that it stops that. the water just running down the sides of the pot or through the kind of
Yeah.
path that it has always finds, and then you're actually not watering your plants at all when that happens.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, I don't do that, and the real reason is because it's a lot of
It's a bit of
effort.
work. Yeah. It's a bit of work.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly right.
It's a bit more effort than I'm like kind of keen to do.
Yeah.
But it's a completely valid and completely fine way to do it. People also, there's a lot of gadgets. I mean, even with all sorts of gardening, but there's a lot of gadgets out there that I think are a bit of a waste of money and time. Like
Mm,
people leave like it's not like a wick, but you kind of put a like a terracotta spike into the pot and then like have a water bottle on the end and like
mm,
that just sounds like a recipe for overwatering.
yeah.
And I just like it just yeah, I'm not into my like garden gadgets like that, if you know what I mean. Like
Totally.
just water
Yeah.
them.
I
Yeah.
think, yeah, being
Um,
there, being present, understanding your plants and watching them, like you say, having that observation is so much
yeah.
better. Um,
Yeah.
let's, because I'm a little bit conscious of time. I could talk to you for hours.
Sorry.
Don't be sorry. I love this. This is great. Um, can we just talk a little bit about, I guess to sort of wrap up what you're currently doing with your business,
Sure.
and kind of where you're heading and anything that people can come and sort of find from you. I know you
Yeah.
spoke about that free guide that has your native plant palette and things like this. Can you just touch on a couple of those things?
Sure, yeah. So, I run a local business, which is a garden design, implementation, and maintenance business. Um, that's separate to what I kind of do online. Online,
Yeah.
I have always had a big love of teaching and departing information, and I studied journalism
Awesome.
at university, and I have always wanted to use those skills in a garden um, environment. I don't know what that
Yeah.
means, but you know what I
Yeah.
mean. Like, kind
Yes.
of. So my whole idea by creating the Gardener's Lodge was to build a website and a set of resources for gardeners that comes from my specific kind of brain.
Hmm.
My loves, like native plants, is what I've ended up focusing right in on with it. Uh, yeah, and so basically, I have a free native planting palette. It's designed for you can download it from thegardenerslodge.com.au. And it's designed to be as versatile as it possibly can for all metropolitan cities in Australia. Now,
Cool.
you're not going to have a great deal of success trying to do that, but I've done my best to put a collection of plants together that should do pretty well. You might have to change a few in and out. But what that is it's basically a like mini garden design, or as we were talking about, a planting palette, which is a list of, I think there's 12, maybe 9 or 12 plants.
Cool.
Um, and that's just a good place to start. It also comes with a whole bunch of information on how to care for the garden, how to plant the garden, care for the garden, how to start your garden bed. It's designed to be replicatable. So it's
Cool.
designed over a 10 square meter kind of area.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's not, not quite. It's not 10 square meters. I think it's like 2 by 2. Sorry.
Right. Okay.
Um,
10 square feet.
uh, yeah. Um, so it can be replicated.
Cool.
It's designed in like a cottage theme. So yeah. So if you want to check that out, to certainly go to the website and grab that free download. I also do online coaching,
Awesome.
where if you need troubleshooting with your garden, there's a lot that can be done without actually being in the garden. A
Mm.
lot of the problems that people face in their gardens are like pretty uh, common between
Yes.
everyone.
Mm.
So yeah, I do that and I do in-person coaching as well, which can be a one-off or it can be, I have people that check in with me every kind of season just to sort of be
Yeah.
like, hey, Michael, what am I doing? Like, what should I be preparing for?
Yeah.
So I love that. Yeah.
I love
But
it.
really, the Gardener's Lodge was just supposed to be a place for resources,
Cool.
um, a place where I can get ideas and thoughts out of my head. I also am launching or relaunching my podcast,
Yes,
which is going to
exciting.
be just called the Gardener's Lodge podcast.
Beautiful.
It was formerly known as Growing Media, and there's a catalog, a back catalog. I spoke to some great guests a few years ago. All the information's still great. I think I spoke to Hannah Maloney from
Yeah,
Gardening
cool.
Australia.
Awesome. Is that still
Yeah, and I've
is all
got
of this still online? Sorry, can I link
it
that
sure
down
is. It's
below?
all yeah, it's all on my website, but it's also on still on
Cool.
Spotify and
Beautiful. Then
Apple
yeah, because
Podcasts.
I want people to be able to go and like check it out, hopefully if they can, and go and like see that. So that would be really cool. And what's like coming up for you in terms of apart from the podcast, what are you hoping to try and be doing over the
Ooh.
next, well, the rest of this year and onwards? Like where's your vision sort of heading
So
without giving
I've
away too much?
taken, yeah, no, I've taken a slight step back from the social media, like Instagram, TikTok side of things. Just didn't really resonate with me. So I'm driving my focus back into the podcast because I
Cool.
loved doing that.
Yeah.
So that's really where I'm going to be focused. I've got some massive changes happening personally as well. We're actually selling this house at the moment. Um, and just to be completely honest, I'm in a very tricky place with even natives because we're actually making a move to the UK.
Are you?
Me and my partner. Yeah.
Wow.
So later this year, we will be popping up in the UK, and
Amazing.
I've kind of I've got a lot on my plate in terms of like how I'm going to move the direction of the Gardener's Lodge. I'm
Yes.
kind of glad I didn't call it like Native Gardens
Yeah,
R Us
Australian
or
native
whatever.
gardens. Yeah.
So I think it'll be really cool to start to look even still at natives in an international context.
That's really
Uh,
cool. That's opens
I've
up so many
been,
possibilities for you.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, as I said, like I love to depart information, so
Yeah.
that's still going to be the focus, education,
Cool.
and having fun. That's the biggest thing with all of this is like I love to do it,
Yeah.
and whatever I do, I need it to be fun. So yeah.
And there we have it, everybody. Thank you again to Mykal. I ended up chatting quite a bit to Mykal off camera as well. What a lovely man, and has some exciting things coming up on the horizon, both professionally and personally, that I'm really keen to follow along with and keep up with his journey. So without going into it a little bit more, I really want you to go and check out his links in the description and go and check out his native plant palette, something I'll be doing because I really want to include some more natives in my own garden, trying to track some of those native beneficial insects and bees and things. And with me trying to get a native beehive in the property as well, it's not only going to help those guys out, but it's going to help bring in more and more species to the garden. So please go and check out that. I know he's got a wealth of knowledge on his website and also on the socials. But again, thank you very much for watching. If you haven't already seen, the intermediate growers guide for organic growing is now online on my website as well. This is a step up from that free guide, the free organic beginners guide. And this one goes into a little bit more depth and allows us to expand on some of those topics that we originally spoke about and give you even more value. So if you're ready to level up from the beginner's guide and move into the intermediate stage, then that guide is now available for you as well. And the links should be in the show notes or the description. So lastly, thank you again so much for watching. if this podcast brought you value, I would extremely appreciate any kind of rating or review on the show. It really helps more people find this, find the show, find the conversations, and to inspire more people to get into the garden. So that would be amazing if you could. And I will see you again next week on another very special podcast episode. Thank you so much. Take care.